beep, beep, beep. Yay. Wow. Hey, y'all. Let's see who shows up. Let me find the chat. I know it's always around here somewhere. Doo-doo-doo. And so I'm on here a little early, so if you pop in, introduce yourself, and let us know who you are, where you're from. Ha! Alright, I seem to have found the chat successfully. Hey, somebody's on here. Yay. So we'll get started here in about 7 minutes. Until then, I'm going to do a little song and dance, and hopefully our connection will hold out. I'm just using my phone in order to get an internet signal. So here at the school, well, everywhere, my home, the office, and the school, we don't have any internet or telephone yet. So it's all cell phones all the time. And as far as I know, I still don't have power at the house. So we shall see. Pardon me for keeping my blood sugar up. And if you don't know, yeah, there's blood everywhere. If you don't know, I'm Bob Linde from the School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies, and I will sit here and randomly rant as I get hydrated before we get started. And I will start as best as possible right at 6 o'clock, and I will babble incoherently until 8. Yes, 8. However long I'm supposed to do this. And feel free to post any questions you may have, and I will get to them. We only have a couple of questions. I think a lot of my folks are from Florida, and a lot of us are a little challenged at the moment. So I have a feeling a lot of my usual online folks will be catching it on YouTube. And so if you aren't able to stay for the whole thing, feel free to catch it on Tradition School of Herbal Studies YouTube page, and I will post it probably tonight. And I will do my best to stay coherent today because I'm a little winded with dealing with all the recovery from the hurricane and all the other fun stuff that's been going on. Seems like I have a friend upstairs. I'm going to have to make him not want to stay anymore. I like it when people come to the class in person or to the open forum in person, but not when they're in the attic. So we seem to have a friend who's taking refuge from the hurricane up there. I'm going to have to encourage him to leave. The joys of having a jungle out here. All right. Well, if you're just joining us, please do. Oops, no, just making sure that nobody was sending me a message at the last second. I don't have a way to check these things. If you join us here at the last minute, say hi, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and we'll get started here in 4.5 minutes. And if you just jumped on and you're seeing the recording, fast forward about 5 minutes. You'll get to all the good stuff. Yay, there's more people. So we'll get started here in about 4 minutes. Let us know who you are, where you're from. Go ahead and post a question if you have one, and we will get to it. We got an easy night tonight. I had somebody who gave me a question like a month ago, and of course I don't seem to be able to find it. So if you're on here, post it again. And I've got one really long one and a couple of other smaller ones that we'll cover tonight. So we got plenty of time to take some additional questions. And we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. Sorry, I spent the whole day out recovering from the hurricane, cleaning up the yard for an herb walk tomorrow, and I'm like, oh, look at all these cuts and blood spots all over me. I was like, oh, well, deal with those later. So feel free to let us know who you are when you get here. Post a question, and we'll get started here in just a minute. And if you're catching the recording, fast forward about 3 minutes, and you can get to all the good stuff and skip my song and dance stalling until everybody gets here. If you don't know it, this is Bob Linde from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies in St. Petersburg, Florida. Teaching crazy herb stuff for about 20 years now, and seeing clients 4 days a week still. Ugh. Hey, Pickles. So I know where you're from. I assume you have power and internet if you're on here. I think we're going to be missing some of our usual crowd. They're still in transit. Hopefully all your plants fared well. We'll get started here in about 2 minutes. If you're just jumping on, let us know where you're from, who you are, and post any questions you may have. And then I'll start babbling incoherently. Whoops, that's weird. All right, I don't know why that's doing that. Facebook is kind enough to change the format on a regular basis, so I never actually know how to do any of this. Hey, Maddie. Yeah, my whole block I think my whole neighborhood's been out since Wednesday afternoon. Yay, we got Florida peeps on here. We're taking over today. Maddie, hopefully you survived all of this well. All right, we're going to get started here in just a minute. Hopefully we get a few more peeps on here to keep it lively. Maddie, if you got any questions, feel free to type them in there. And we'll get started here in just a second. There's my other piece of paper. Oh, there you are. All right, it's 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Uh-oh. Oh, okay, yeah, okay. It's bad to lose chickens. If you don't know, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an herbalist, a registered herbalist and an acupuncture physician, and here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies. Here's my selfless plug. Let's see if I can do this. This way I don't have to read it all. Yay, there's lots of cool classes coming up. I'm actually going to say them here in just a second. I know nobody can read that. Check the website. Yay. Cool. There's lots of crap we do. I got to do a quick selfless plug. I apologize in advance. But if anybody's... There you are. Hey, you got your questions up first. The Chinese program is starting on October 29th. And it is imperative, because you can't continue if you don't catch the first 3 classes. It is live here in St. Petersburg. I promise we won't be hit by any... hey, Maureen, back again. Oh, cool. Well, not cool, but I will get to that. And so the Chinese program, it's a 2-year program, 1 weekend a month for 2 years, and clinicals every Wednesday night, starting at the end of January. And it starts the October 29th, but we're like 3/4 of the way full. So if you're interested, please jump in there now and contact us and get registered in. We've got a ton of cool classes coming up to include, there's an herb walk here at the school. I spent the whole day cleaning up the mess from the hurricane, and Yeah, you're in Denver. You don't know that. We just had one hell of a hurricane. And luckily, we didn't get a direct hit here. We just got a lot of power outages. So I'm a little disheveled tonight because I haven't had power since Wednesday. And I'm having to use my phone just to connect to the internet. So we're doing the best we can here, and I know everybody should be back and fairly normal by the end of the weekend, I would hope. But we've got a edible and medicinal herb walk here at the school tomorrow, and sorry, anybody who's not in the area, we're not going to live stream it because that's a pain in the ass for me to do by myself. But if you can join us, we're only going to do the 9 a.m. because we had a lot of people cancel. And we were originally scheduled for a second one in the afternoon, but just for my own sanity, and I still got a mess at my house to clean up, we're just going to do the 9 a.m. Herb walk here at the school, 6340 Central Avenue in St. Petersburg, Florida. Also, we've got an open house for anybody who's interested about the classes, the Chinese program, anything else. We've got an open house on October 7th. Oops, I missed one. We have an ongoing, a lot of folks who get into herbal medicine, and whether they take one or two classes or they take all of them, they have they haven't had a science class in a really long time, especially things like anatomy, physiology, and pathology. And although we cover it some in the classes, we encourage anybody who's not really sharp on their various body systems and so forth to take our anatomy and physiology for the herbalists. So we do one body system a month, like 2.5 hours, and you can do that online or in person, always bonus in person. Most of our classes we do online now, if you don't know it. Open house, muscular system is October 6th. Sorry, I didn't write these in the right order. Oh, there's a new class coming up that I'm super excited about. I think this is the first time Gray has offered it. One of our teachers, Gray, is an Ayurvedic practitioner and teacher, and she does like once a month, she's doing a 2.5 hour class on Ayurvedic medicine. We haven't set up an entire clinical program yet. But she's doing a class on daily and seasonal rituals of Ayurveda. And I'm kind of excited about that one. I know a few of them, but I was chatting with her the other day, and she just had a slew of things. I was like, yeah, I don't know anything about that or why. And I know she always has some cool hands-on stuff that she likes to do. That is October 13th. Definitely sign up in advance, although it's not likely to fill up. We'd like to know how many people are coming. She always has like food and supplies and cool stuff, and we want to make sure it's all there. And October 14th, I'm doing a class on herb-drug interactions. That was kind of a last-minute thing I've added in, and I'm going to rant about that a little bit this evening. But there has been, once again, it seems to happen about every 4 or 5 years, there has been a kind of focused attack on the profession of herbal medicine, the practice of herbal medicine by the media, which seems to be old hat for them. And so I want to make sure that I, address that in a public forum, but also one of the biggest concerns people have is about safety and of herbal medicine and herb-drug interactions specifically. So we're going to address all of that. That is a free class, so I encourage everybody, including practitioners, to take that one, and we'll do that live here in the classroom as well as online, so everybody can catch that one. And I think and then food for energy by one of our new practitioners here, which I'm super excited about because it's one of the biggest things. I need more energy. You know, everybody's like Tony Little, who's super amped up on caffeine. And so she's going to talk about things that are energy stealers and energy feeders. And Martina's just awesome. She taught her first class with us a couple of weeks ago, and really just everybody loved it. And she is back. She just got back home from Bulgaria, and just in time, literally the day before the hurricane was supposed to hit us. And she's back and raring to go. She's back at work tomorrow and is available for appointments, as well as B12 and other vitamin and homeopathic injections. I think she's there pretty much all day tomorrow. We're back to our normal operating hours. Yeah, the Gazelle guy, was that one? Tony Little had so many crazy things. He was kind of a muscle head and was just super high energy, and most of it he got from cocaine, and after he got busted with that, Tony Little was more just about 5 pots of coffee a day. and I'm sure he was always looking for more. Um, Maureen, I'm actually going to start with you. I was about to start with another one, but sorry, and that's all my selfless plugs for the day, or at least until about 7 o'clock. Then I'll do another short burst of this. So, welcome anybody who's just joined in. Feel free to post your questions and let us know who you are, where you're from, and things like that. So, Maureen, let me. Reoccurring COVID has developed sores in their mouth. There's so many things I have to say about that. And that has been, we've seen a couple of interesting things. The long COVID, which has its own unique set of issues and is generally accepted, although I have one of my patients is been told by her pulmonologist that she doesn't have long COVID, she's just fat, and I told him to kick him repeatedly where the sun don't shine, but I don't think she's a little too nice for that. She's close, but not that bad. Oh yes, I have to do, none of this constitutes medical advice, and nor does it mean that I'm your practitioner. So yay. Take all of this with a grain of salt. Don't believe anything I say. Let me get back to that. I got to write that one down because I know that one. Frequent urine. Okay. So I get a lot of people who have residual symptoms of COVID as well as the reoccurring. And obviously, my short answer is what's wrong with somebody's immune system that's getting sick from the same thing repeatedly. And one of my concerns always is with their immune system. And when we say that, there's so many different parts of an immune system that we need to be concerned with. Everything from vitamin D to things that are depleting their immune system and prescription medications that oftentimes suppress our immune system. Our immunosuppressants that we use, people use for autoimmune disorders in particular, creates challenges to make you more susceptible to catch things. Also, stress is famous for depleting our immune system. And so looking at, I hate to say it, is like the things I usually look for somebody who's getting any kind of illness, and whether it's shingles outbreaks or COVID outbreaks, it means that they're probably not producing antibodies in the case of COVID, or their immune system in some form or fashion. So my first look is, are they taking medications that suppress the immune system? That includes things that are steroids, like prednisone, suppress the immune system and make you more susceptible. Vitamin D levels, I always encourage them to get vitamin D levels checked, and as long as we're vampiring somebody and getting their blood checked, to do a CBC with differential, and that breaks out the various aspects of the immune system, to see if there's something that's literally not functioning. And then, I hate to say it, from a medical perspective, we have to chase that down. And then looking at, we oftentimes look at the health of the gut and its relationship to our immune system. So if our gut's in poor health from the gut biome, the good bacteria that's in our gut, our mucosal lining in the small intestine and large intestine. One that people don't think about in its relationship to frequent illness in general is the amount of hydrochloric acid in our stomach. So our hydrochloric acid in our stomach, besides helping us break down proteins, absorbing B12, it also sterilizes our food. And so, yay, fun subjects. I hope none of you are eating dinner. Our mucosal membrane in our nose has many purposes in there, one of which is to trap bacteria, yeast, fungus, allergens, all that stuff, and it attacks that, forms a little thing, and then we either, if you're 8-year-old, you pick it out as boogers, you sneeze it out, or more often we get postnasal drip. And so that presumably then going into our stomach to be destroyed by our stomach acid. If somebody has low stomach acid, then all kinds of interesting pathogens will end up passing through and getting into the small intestine and potentially getting us sick. And that can be anything from food poisoning to a food sensitivity kind of reaction and so forth. Because you mentioned it as having mouth ulcers, this is a sad statement, but because I come from a weird family. I remember learning when I was about 8 years old or something that if you got canker sores in your mouth, that was a gut dysbiosis, and so that the best thing that could help with that was acidophilus. At the time, that was about all we had for probiotics. Now we add other things like a more full spectrum kind of probiotic to create that gut health. And so our tongue and our mouth can sometimes be reflective of our gut biome. And that may resonate with the person you said had reoccurring COVID. If they treated him with antibiotics, which I have no idea why, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't do it. If they had been on long-term steroids, that will also mess up the gut as well as suppress the immune system. And so they may be on steroids for something else. They might have asthma and be on a steroidal inhaler that they've been using more often. Sometimes they'll prophylactically, people with COVID, they'll go ahead and give them a steroidal inhaler to help protect their lungs, even though most of medical advice is against that, but whatever. Doesn't mean people don't do it. So I would say find out what's wrong with the immune system, explore those, but my guess is there's some reason the gut biome and need for probiotics and or low stomach acid, those oftentimes go hand in hand. So somebody who's got a lot of stress oftentimes ends up with weakened immune system, and if it's long-term stress, low HCl, hydrochloric acid, and then next thing you know, they've got food sensitivities, depressed immune system, mineral deficiencies, B12 deficiency. Yay! So much fun stuff that people end up with from long-term stress. And it's funny, I think we talked about this last month, or probably every month, honestly. The last few years with COVID and all the other insanity that's gone on, I think all of us, like I've managed stress really well, but literally this past 3 years, I felt more stressed than I have any other time in my life, and it's been really interesting. Where it was rare for me to see low HCl, and now I see it like in every third person. I feel like low hydrochloric acid is a major issue. Insulin is okay. Kristen, let me get yours. Yours is going to take me a minute or two because there's all kinds of craziness in here. SLS. So I don't know. Oh, with SLS. Okay. Certainly that, if all of us were getting mouth ulcers, I'd say it's an issue. So although a lot of different chemicals can have an effect on our immune system, I find, and I know this is contrary to what a lot of people write, I don't find that's an issue. And if a very normal mainstream toothpaste, for instance, or mouthwash, or somebody's having tomatoes and those are causing mouth ulcers, that's actually a symptom rather than the cause. That is a symptom of that underlying, usually mucosal lining of the gut being out of whack. And so those are very correctable usually, but there's usually a how come all of us don't get mouth ulcers from those things? And so I would say to get to the root of the problem, because we're seeing not just the mouth ulcers, but also the repeated COVID infections, that's looking at a greater underlying issue there. But yes, those are possible ones, just not very likely. So Kristen had somebody that I think we talked about last month, although I don't remember these 5 minutes after I'm done. So I don't totally remember what we did. But she had had a pretty high fever a couple of months ago and recovered from that, but now is getting a lot of, oops, I'm sorry, Maddie, I didn't write down yours. Oh, too many pieces of paper. STCM, female hormones. All right, cool. Uh, so the this person started to get hair loss, and there's actually like 10 different things here. And I'm curious, and I may have, like, I just scribbled notes from the email you sent. Were they getting night sweats or hot flashes, as well as the hair loss? I forget if there were other symptoms that were going on. So, one of the things we see a lot of times is when folks get an illness, and although they're active, like high fever and generally malaise and all the fun things that come with an issue. Okay, good. That actually explains a lot. That we talk about, and this one is best answered by Chinese medicine, and it kind of goes, and so she had said she felt like there was something more serious going on, referred her to an herbalist in the area, and I'm gonna stop right there, and I'm gonna quote David Winston real fast. Herbs are popular, but herbalists aren't, and that's a problem. So it's like, oh, I got an upset tummy because I ate the wrong food. Here's some chamomile, is fine. Um, but when people are Googling for cancer and can't figure out why they haven't cured their cancer, that's when you're supposed to see somebody who dedicates themselves to studying this stuff. And so, finding an herbalist with some level of training outside of the internet is important, and finding somebody who's ideally either mentored long term with somebody or gone to some sort of formal training is really important, so that we're not. I one of my pet peeves is, well, I researched it. Your 30 minutes of Google search does not equate to research. Uh, Research is one of those things you do over months, and you read actual research from PubMed and things like that. And actually, to understand that is a unique skill, which I won't say that I'm great at, but I'm okay at. So this client, after their long illness, started to get night sweats, hot flashes, as well as some hair loss. And it wasn't like, oh my God, she's bald now, but more hair falling out than there was normal. And she had appropriately, and nice thing is, safe, had said, well, you're losing some hair. Let's see if we can't nourish your hair. Made a little hair oil, which is a thing, in case you didn't know, and used burdock seed and gotu kola, which I'm guessing those were interesting choices from my perspective, but I think those might be kind of an Ayurvedic approach. I won't swear to that. Those weren't two that I would normally glom onto for hair stuff. But appropriately had asked the question, what about rosemary? And she was hesitant to use that because she thought it was too stimulating. And so, yes, it's stimulating, but not in the way that it would keep you up at night. Rosemary is an amazing herb that falls into an interesting category called rubefactans, which is fancy talk for saying it brings blood to the surface. And it is my number one favorite approach for hair loss, anything other than male pattern baldness. But for my chemo patients, whose biggest issue, uh, yeah, in order to keep their hair, and it's always fascinating to me, people who are like, oh my God, I've got cancer, I'm going to go through chemo, blah, blah, blah. Their biggest issue sometimes is, yeah, but I don't want to lose my hair. And I was like, okay, I wouldn't want to die, but I get it. And so rosemary is an infusion, strong infusion tea, and infused into the hair and left in is my favorite approach, but you have to do it at least once a day. So rosemary helps with memory, so chemo brain as well, but not stimulating like a cup of coffee would at night, and probably a phenomenal thing to add into that hair oil, and will undoubtedly have good success. Rosemary is also a natural colorant for dark hair. Chamomile that you mentioned, pickles, is better for blonde. The other things that I oftentimes will add into that when it's a I can talk really. When it's a hormonal imbalance that's causing it, I'll oftentimes add, and Maddie, this goes a little bit to your question, with people who have hormonal imbalances, to include male pattern baldness, but also PCOS, I'll add saw palmetto to it. A Chinese herb called Hisho Wu. And also, it's used in Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, a clipta. If I can spell it, it will look better. Clipta. I'm close. I actually have an elderly woman right now. She's in her late 80s, and her hair was not just a little thin, like she was balding. And she didn't like it. There was like almost pointless to do the comb over kind of thing for her. And I did Hishowu, Clipta, saw palmetto, and rosemary as a tincture, actually, and put it in a spray bottle. And she would spray that into her hair, massage it into her scalp. Once a day. I asked her to do it twice a day, but it wasn't happening. And after about 3 months, her hairstylist actually commented on, like, you got more hair than the last time I saw you. So I would say I changed the ratio of those depending on what I think is going on. Otherwise, I usually go with just equal ratios and all of that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a weed. You can probably find it in your backyard, but it is a very well researched and effective topical, as well as all of those can be used internally. I would say the Hishowu, not caution, but you're more likely to get some stomach bloating and loose stools from both Hishowu and saw palmetto. Both of those, if not correct for you, will throw your gut a little out of whack. Stop taking it, you'll go back to normal. The Hishowu is sorry, I really will get back to the rest of your question, Kristen. I'm feeling a little ADD. It's the lack of electricity, I think. Hishowu translates to Mr. He's black hair. And there's an interesting long folkloric story about that. But the idea is that it will turn gray hair black by ingesting it. And I always said, yeah, that's a cute story. But many years ago, my mom was seeing another practitioner, because don't treat family, it doesn't work well. She got, this other practitioner got my mom to actually do raw herbs. She was boiling up raw herbs every day. And it was fascinating that after a couple of months, my mom, who had now let her hair go totally black, or totally gray, started to grow black roots in. And so it's really shocking how powerful some of those herbs can be. So, Kristen, back to your story. Somebody was feeling a little off still, even though they had recovered from it. And we can see this so often. We see this in Epstein-Barr. We see this with COVID. We see this with a range of different things, that we have that acute attack and acute illness, and then we just have this generalized malaise. Oftentimes we'll see chills and fever, excuse me, not chills and fever, night sweats and hot flashes. And Chinese medicine does probably the best job at recognizing what this is. And they refer to it as a trapped pathogen. And in this case, if she didn't have night sweats and hot flashes before, but ever since this fever does, there is very likely something that is trapped half interior, half exterior. And there is a classic formula that we use, Shao Chai Hu Tong, minor blue plurum formula, that is specific for helping to address that. And usually it's one you take for a week or three and resolves it. And I'm not going to type all these in, so I'll say them slowly, and I'll do my best to give you the translations of these. And I'm not, it's one of those things where you don't know. I don't know the practitioner who your friend saw, And I don't know all of the things, tongue and pulse, and all the minutiae of symptoms that could go with this. Um, but it looks like there was a piece of Xiao Chai Hu Tong in there, plus some other things that maybe she was trying to address. Oh, and I should mention the other thing that will cause hair to fall out oftentimes will cause not necessarily night sweats and hot flashes. Certainly, that can be hormonal kind of issue, but blood deficiency. And so, if she got really sick, had that 104 fever or whatever, and never really got a good appetite back, or was a little deficient anyway, if she was anemic, that would also cause some of these symptoms as well. And so it was a Chinese formula that the woman recommended, and this was a raw formula or a powder formula, Kristen? Because that was some nasty herbs. If she's drinking it, your friend's badass. Uh, so I'll say the Mudon pea is a tree peony, and this one moves chi and is cooling and dispersing. Oh, powdered. Okay, that's not nearly as hard. I thought she was putting some turtle shell in there and stuff. Dong Guai is Angelica sinensis, is warming and nourishes the blood and moves the blood a little bit. Chai Hu, which is blue plurum, that is technically a release exterior herb that has an upward energy, but is usually used for qi stagnation. Bai Shao is white peony root. This one is one of my favorite herbs. It nourishes the blood and yin and softens the liver. And personally, I think all of our livers need to be softened. Shudi Huang, which is Romania, and this one nourishes blood and yin as well. Baiju is white atractylodes, and this one helps to nourish the qi and also transform or dampness, moisture, phlegm. There we go. Digu P, is the stem. Sorry, I didn't research these ahead of time. I literally just scribbled them down, so I'm doing these off the top of my head. Digu P is the branches of the wolfberry lycium, and that one is specifically for night sweats and gently nourishes the yin and the essence. Dong Shen, I'm saying it funny like that because there's also a Dan Shen. Dong Shen is Cotinopsis, and that is slightly moistening and tonifies the digestive energy, the spleen qi. It's frequently used as a replacement for ginseng. I almost never use it, but it's very common to use. That's one of those personal Bob issues. Zhi is gardenia seed, also moves blood and qi and is cooling. Mai Mendong nourishes the yin, and yin being the fluids of the good fluids of the body, of the lung and stomach, frequently used for night sweats, hot flashes, lung weakness or dryness, and constipation. Xuanshang is Ligustricum root. It is for moving the blood, specifically the liver blood. Helps with menstrual stuff. Yeah. I had a teacher once, Dr. Tian, Hai Tian. He's like, any woman who's still menstruating, you put a little Xuanshang in there and you'll make her happy, because we use that for everything from PMS to menstrual pain to migraine headaches. There's so many formulas, and just a little bit goes a long way. Guiban is the turtle shell, and it's a freshwater turtle shell. It's not a sea turtle. That would be illegal. And it's interesting, the idea that, like, why would an herbalist recommend something that's not a plant? And Chinese medicine uses, we expand the concept of herbs to include rocks, which are basically minerals, animal parts like a turtle shell, lots of sea critters. Um, we use crystals internally and externally. We use insects, insect parts, flying squirrel poop, cicada moltings, you name it. We got some weird stuff. And, we laugh at eye of newt. We use the whole newt. We don't use just one little eye. We actually use a variety of reptiles as well. And it is an issue, obviously, for somebody who is vegan. That would be not used or should not be used. Also, some of these things is one of the issues with Chinese herbs is sometimes endangered. Animals are being used, which is not only unethical, it's illegal. And how some of these critters were raised also is always a question. And there isn't a good answer for it. It also, in certain religions, some of the animals that are used aren't acceptable within their religion. So it is important sometimes to know if somebody puts down that they're Muslim or Jewish, where they're avoiding certain types of critters. That's insects, that's certain sea critters that we might use. Things like deer wouldn't be acceptable. And so we need to make exceptions for that. But I will say that guiban, sorry, I do digress, is a phenomenal herb for nourishing the essence and blood. And so that, like, this woman, if I see guiban in there, not only is it helping with night sweats and hot flashes, but chances are they're seeing some really severe deficiencies that have been there for a long time. That's too funny. Awesome, you found an old gecko video of mine. Those were old. Huang Bai is, oh my gosh, Huang Bai is philodendron root, I believe. I always forget which one's which. Clears heat and dampness from the lower body. Very antimicrobial. Germu, oh, I always call it onomatopoeia, is clears heat and nourishes yin. I forget its Latin name, sorry. Juhua's chrysanthemum flower. And that one was probably, of all of the herbs in here, there was like two that I was like, I don't know why those are in there. Juhua is very gently clears heat and wind and has a focus on the eyes. So unless she specifically complained of eye burning, eye itching, eye dryness, something like that, then it would make sense. But if she didn't, then I'm like, I don't know why they put that in there. Ban Sha is Pinellia, and that's an interesting one. So the Chinese, we use a lot of toxic herbs, and sometimes we use them long term even. And so Ban Sha, if you look that up, you're going to say, oh my God, this is toxic. They're trying to kill her. It's not really toxic, even though if you read it, the folklore, it's the pain of 1,000 needles piercing your stomach. Germu should not be, ZHIMU is a root actually. So the Muli is an oyster shell. So Ban Sha, once it's been processed, it's considered no longer toxic. So that one's okay. It helps with nausea and vomiting and dries phlegm, opens up the lungs. Very, very commonly used. Gotong is Uncaria, and that's the same as cat's claw. It's the Chinese version of cat's claw. And we'll use this. It's funny, if this person knows Western and Chinese herbs, they may have used that for its antimicrobial properties. From a Chinese perspective, we use it for what's called internal wind, things like tremors and dizziness or vertigo. And so I consider the Chinese and the South American cat's claw interchangeable. I actually kind of prefer the Uno de Gato, the cat's claw of South America, but the Gotong is so convenient that, and I'd say a little bit more gentle. And then Fuling is Poria mushroom that, in that form, that particular cut, has the function of um, drain dampness, tonify the digestion, the spleen, and calm the shen, i.e., just kind of slightly calming. It kind of does all of them equally. And very common if we see any kind of coating on the thumb or anything uh, that tells us a little bit about that. So the overall formula has a focus on clearing heat and nourishing yin. Um, After that, I don't have a clue. Nothing wrong with the formula. It's one of those I recognize pieces of classical formulas, but I'm not sure if this is an actual classical formula or one they just kind of created. And that's the in Western herbal medicine we have a tendency to have to create a new formula every time we see somebody. And so, Western herbalists, we use pairings that we often are very common and talked about. You might see something like, oh, of course, I can't think of anything right now. Uh, uh, Dandelion and burdock, both good for the liver. One's drying, one's moistening. Both are clearing heat, so very, very common to use. Cleavers and chickweed for any kind of hard, lumpy things. Phlegm, we tend to use those too. And so we'll frequently put those things together in combinations based on what we see, but really kind of hard work to always create a new formula with every person. In Chinese herbal medicine, we have a tendency to really emphasize the specifics of a diagnostics of their symptoms, based on 8 principle, 5 element, and based on that, literally you go to the formula book and you use one of the classical formulas. What you find is, oh shit, yeah, I forgot it was up there now. Well, it's very, that's a frightening hurricane that's hit that many of us. And so, as people get more and more comfortable with the Chinese herbs, we tend to do a little bit of both. That we'll find a foundational formula, and there's probably, I'm sure I'm missing one. There's like Free and Easy Wonder, it looks like, is in here primarily. Actually, it's Jiawei Shaiyuan, the Free and Easy Wonder Plus, but then they threw in some extra stuff, probably to address some symptoms. And so that's very normal. That's generally how I practice as well. And based on what you told me, I would have probably gone the Xiao Chai Hu Tong route, but this person saw tongue and a pulse and went through all of the details. And so they're probably addressing a little bit of qi stagnation and yin deficiency, maybe a little underlying jing essence deficiency. But that's all I can see. Yeah, that's kind of it's funny. It's I'm looking at this. I'm like, it's a combination of Jiawei Shaiyuan and Zhibai Dihuangwan with a little something for some eye stuff. Ooh, maybe there was an eye twitch. I can see the Gotong Juhua helping with that. I don't know. I'm entertaining myself trying to reverse engineer all of that. All right. Let me talk about the frequent urination. Just because that's an easy one. I don't have to hurt my brain too hard. That one was a challenge. Actually, you know what? No, I wanted to talk about, kudos to you for finding them an herbalist to go more in depth. And I think that's one of the things that we don't do often enough. I see this on Facebook in particular, but all over the internet. People are just, somebody says, I got insert symptom here, and then 57 people throw some random herb at them, or say, well, my third brother's cousin had a sniffle once, and that turned out to be cancer, and you should treat cancer, or it's a parasite because everything's a parasite. And I'm like, oh my God, stop it. So it is, when it's something that's chronic and so severe that people have to reach out to the internet to find an it's like complex things need not necessarily complex solutions. Sometimes they're very easy solutions. but it requires that we look at the whole person. That's the cool part of alternative medicine, herbal medicine in particular, is we don't just chase symptoms down, especially when we're looking at a chronic disease. It's not an herb for every ill because honestly, that's what Western medicine does. We got a pill for every ill. So, if we're saying we prefer to not go that route for especially chronic disease, then let's do a better job and let's see what's the underlying, what's out of whack, what's wrong. And so that does require more expertise, more training, a diagnostic system. And you did a great job. When I don't know, if I can't say, oh yeah, Joe lives there, they're great. I go to the American Herbalist Guild's website and I look for one of their RH, their registered herbalists. As a general rule, those people are going to be better trained herbalists, sometimes with a license, sometimes not. But the RH means that they've got a diagnostic system, that they have multiple years of clinical practice under their belt, and so forth. So that's where I go to find an herbalist for somebody in a place I don't know. And the other part in there that always requires, and I didn't mention that thing. The other part that I think is really important is we recognize this in Chinese medicine in particular, but we also see it in Ayurvedic medicine, and when we look at things like Tibetan medicine, things like that. It is important that we know whether there are restrictions on somebody. You can't be just throwing, oh, I heard this formula was good for so and so, and they have celiac disease where they can't have any gluten. Like, it's not like, oh, I don't like gluten or I don't like GMO or something. It's like, no, some formulas in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine contain gluten. If they have a nightshade sensitivity, then something like that may already be in those formulas. If they get frequent kidney stones, there may be things like the Ban Sha that are high in oxalates. They may be not dangerous for them, but it's more likely to cause a kidney stone. And knowing the individual enough about who they are, that if they're vegan, if they have a religious reason why they can't have a particular substance, that we have to know what these herbs are. And too often, I see a lot of Chinese practitioners who they've memorized this formula is good for that, but they don't really have a clear idea of what the herbs in there are, and they're not taking into account that, like, no, you don't give turtle shell to a vegan. And if they're not vegan, like, oh heck yeah, eat the dang thing. It's absolutely amazing how effective it can be. It's a little creepy when they drop chunks of turtle shell into your bag and you have to boil it up. But the 5-to-1 concentrates that it sounds like she was given, then it's not like you're crunching on turtle bones or anything like that. It is one that I use regularly with people to good success. So yeah, I always say it's like always understand and know all the herbs in every formula, whatever tradition you're coming from, to recognize potential adverse reactions to it. And so often I hear about, like, oh, I gave him this one, it was good for digestion, but then it made him really sick. And it's like, well, there's gluten in there because there's a lot of herbs that we use that contain gluten. For any of you who are dealing with celiacs, Mayway.com. If you Google gluten Chinese herbs, Mayway, they have a PDF that you can download. You don't need an account or anything. That gives you, I believe, all of the Chinese herbs and all of the formulas that contain gluten. I don't remember whether or not they have on there. And the one herb, Shu Di Huang, the processed Romania, for somebody with celiacs or severe sensitivities to gluten, is likely to cause some sort of a reaction. It has been steamed with malt vinegar. And that seems minor, but I've literally had enough people starting to negatively respond to that super, like, undetectable amount that I've actually stopped using Shudi. I use Shengdi, which is the unprocessed, so it hasn't been steamed. Bob's personal preference. People take it all the time and they're fine. But because I find that that's too frequently an unrecognized sensitivity, I don't want to ever add to their grief. But then we have to lower the dosage of it. It's a pain in the butt. Right, let's talk about... Oh, and I didn't mention lemon balm, and I forget who had recommended lemon balm. But lemon balm, besides being yummy, I think of it as lemon mint. It's a great digestive. And lemon balm is also a good for chi stagnation. It helps with stress, and specific for, and it's so funny, we think of lemon balm good for herpes virus in both oral and genital. It can, and it's been researched for that. It is helpful for preventing outbreaks and the length of outbreaks. And the lemon balm is antiviral. And when we look at the herpes family of viruses, there's a bunch of things in there like chickenpox, Epstein-Barr virus, and a slew of others that are very common, as is the genital and oral herpes. And so it is a very gentle, easy herb, both for stress, but also as a generalized antiviral, and probably tastes better than the powdered yuckiness that she's drinking there. So I would say that one's fine and is totally fine for her to enjoy that with the Chinese formula if she wants. So let's go back to 80-year-old dude with frequent urination at night. And there's so many questions I have on that one. When we think about urination, sorry, I'm just like, how do I cover the 27 subjects about this? When we talk about urination, generally under the age of 60, men should not wake up at night to pee. If they're waking up at night to pee, they should get their prostate checked. For women, you have an extra parts in your belly, and so your bladder is slightly smaller, and so one time, one time a night for women up until the age of 60. And obviously, if you drank a gallon of water right before you go to bed, it would be normal to get up. Don't drink so much water right before you go to bed. But at some point, so after 60, yes, if guys getting up one time a night to pee, that's fine, but you should still get your prostate checked. It's your PSA, prostate-specific antigen. And oftentimes it's BPH, benign prostate hyperplasia, an enlarged prostate. And so that's usually very easy to fix, either with dietary change, exercise, and simple things like saw palmetto root, saw palmetto or stinging nettle root. There we go. Got those two, mashed them together. That's usually, and there's other things that can be used as well. Sometimes there's food sensitivities and excess phlegm. But as we start to see 80-year-olds, certainly the prostate is the short answer, but that's not the only possible reason that they might be getting that frequent urination. Things to look at, we frequently talk about Kegel exercises for women, but men have benefits from Kegel exercises as well. And sometimes that can be just teaching the exercise, but they may actually need to go to a physical therapist that specializes in pelvic floor exercise, rehabilitation. There is probably, and there's a lot of times where it's like past history, there's so much damage to that you're just stuck with that. But if they're not peeing frequently during the day, and they're not drinking a crap ton of water like in an hour before they go to bed, then you're like, all right, there's got to be something that's different in this nighttime. And what I find, I just assume an 80-year-old is going to be on some sort of a medication. Colorado, it's not as common. Here, you're probably on 10 medications by the time you're 80. And that's in good health. I know it's ridiculous. But what I find is they're oftentimes told to take their diuretics at night. And, oh, no meds. Well, that shoots my idea. All right, I was sure I was right on that one, but I'm going to say this one anyway. There is a like 0.5% increased benefit of taking a diuretic at night, according to a single research study. And so every doctor prescribes their diuretics at night. And what that means is a bunch of people are getting up all night long peeing because they just took their stupid diuretic and they don't get any sleep, and that's probably going to kill them. So I always tell people, it's like, I didn't prescribe this medication. Ask your prescribing physician if you can take your diuretic in the morning. 100% of the time they've been told they can, and all of a sudden now they get a good night's sleep. So that's my short answer for anybody who's on a diuretic. Please ask your doctor if you can switch that to the daytime. There may be that there's some weird interaction I'm unfamiliar with for some other med, but as a general rule, there's not a problem with doing that. So certainly having the prostate checked is important. It's a super common problem, and obviously things like prostate cancer, bladder cancer has to be ruled out. And so both a urinalysis test to check for weird stuff in the urine and just generalized blood work to look for PSA. They're also, well, actually, Marie, let me ask you this. Pee is normal during the day. I won't say this isn't that rare. It's pretty common, but because if it's only at night, then we're either gonna see there's something going on at night, and that could be alcohol, obviously a more common nighttime thing. That might be an irritant. It doesn't sound like IC, because then okay, it only happens at night. Very interesting. So I would look for what is the nighttime routine. And it could be anything from if he's restricting water in the daytime and only drinking at night, it could be an issue. Alcohol would be my most likely guess. Also, sorry, trying to think of other interesting reasons for that. Of like, oh, I have my little half a cup of ice cream treat at night, something like that is a very real possibility. And the more uncomfortable questions, yep. All right, I'll stop that. The other things that happen sometimes, that especially we talk about as we age, that's our essence, our jing declines. Yeah, so time to stop doing that crap or dilute it or something. I don't know, but it's probably the drink. It's an irritant, and so it's irritating the bladder. That's just keeping them up all night. Tell them to have the cordial for breakfast. No, just kidding. Just because they're 80 doesn't mean that they're not sexually active, and whether they have a partner or not, they may still be sexually active. And for men in particular, orgasm, ejaculate is the definition of essence, and so any sexual activity at night for somebody who's already depleted in age can also lead to frequent urination. The other thing I always look for when I have somebody with reoccurring UTI, and it's probably the booze, this is just generic for everybody else, reoccurring urinary tract infections, and frequent urination, I look for, I'll send them to a urologist that specializes in IC, interstitial cystitis, which is technically an autoimmune disorder, and, poking around looking for food sensitivities, ice cream, chips, extra salty food at night, popcorn, alcohol, all of those are potential irritants, and obviously salt tends to increase urination as well. So literally, it's always the trick is poke around till you find it, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I usually you look at somebody, you ask them a few questions, and you can oh, nighttime hot toddy, like nothing wrong with that. only if it keeps you up at night. Um, the other thing, it's funny, I make lots of booze jokes, but I'm not much of a drinker. I have a cheap date when it comes to that. And what I find is, like, normally I sleep like a champ. If I have 2 glasses of wine, I will literally have night sweats. And I will wake up between 1 and 3 a.m., which in Chinese medicine, we have every organ has a 2 hour time slot. And so the liver time, which obviously has to process that booze, literally I wake up between 1 and 3, which is the liver time. And so it's one of those things where like, oh, there's a reason I don't drink. And that's lousy 2 glasses of wine that kicks my butt. All right, that's enough on frequent urination. We said all of that. All right, it's close enough to 7, so I'm going to say, yay, for anybody who's jumped on. I'm Bob Linde. I'm a registered herbalist, acupuncture physician here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, where the hurricane luckily missed again, and we're going to keep it that way. And I am a part of Tradition's School of Herbal Studies, where you can find out more on traditionsherbschool.com, and our clinical practice, which is acupuncture and herbal therapies at acuherbals.com. And 6 days a week, we have herbalists and acupuncturists on staff. You can do walk-in B12 and other interesting vitamins and homeopathics most of the days, because I don't do those. And we've also 3 nights a week, we've got an intern clinic where our senior students get practice. Monday night is primarily acupuncture interns from East West College in Sarasota. Tuesday nights is our Western herb students getting practice. And Wednesday night, we have 1 acupuncturist this semester, and primarily our Chinese herb students getting practice. And they're supervised by me or one of the other practitioners here at the clinic. Oh, yes, and there's too many things we do. And we've got a plant nursery in the back, if you don't know it, with all kinds of interesting, primarily medicinal plants there. All kinds of local plants as well as Chinese. I've got a really nice crop of Jiao Gulan, Genema pentaphyllum, which is sometimes called southern ginseng, growing right now. The Lingdom vitae, which is the northern Palo Santos. I think, sorry, it's pricey. I think I have 2 Ilex Wayusa plants that are potted up now. And I don't know, there's always some interesting, weird things. Oh, and I've got a bunch of large baobab trees that are for sale right now, too. I think we've got 3 left. All right, that was the end of my selfless plugs. Let's get back to the good stuff. So, Maddie, you said, oh my gosh, hormone stuff. And for anybody who's jumped on, sorry, I always forget to say these things. I got my usual folks giving me stuff. If anybody has any questions, feel free, even if it's your first time here. Bonus if you tell us who you are, where you're from, but more importantly, feel free to ask questions or for clarification. I say crazy Western and Chinese things and medical things occasionally, so I'm always happy to back up and or slow down and explain my gibberish sometimes. So, hormone stuff from Chinese medicine perspective. It's turning into very Chinese night. It's not usually it's very Western oriented. So bonus for me, I get to say Chinesey stuff. Chinese medicine looks at the cycle kind of uniquely and very symptom based, and so not a single symptom points us in a specific disharmony. And the Chinese don't necessarily, if we look at the older texts, we don't necessarily recognize the concept of hormones. Obviously, modern science tells us they are. We find books that try to say testosterone is yang and estrogen is yin, and so all the yin nourishing herbs are estrogenic. And I'd be like, bullshit. That's okay, and there are some that we can say, like dungguai is very estrogenic, and deer antler seems to have an effect on testosterone levels, and so I personally don't encourage going down that pathway. I think that is fraught with danger and errors and throwing people out of whack. Um, as a general rule, I'm saying these specifically because without cool charts and drawing on the board, I'll just confuse some people. For women who are still menstruating, that from the stop of bleeding, about 5 to 7 days is the time we nourish the blood because they've lost some. From 7 days, those first 7 days to ovulation, we nourish chi. Um, then at and right after ovulation, we move chi, and for the 5 to 7 days before the start of bleeding, we move blood. And as a general rule, if somebody's like, my menses is good, I don't have any PMS, I don't have a premenstrual syndrome, I don't have any cramps, it's predictable, I it's every 28 days, it's clockwork, I'm on the moon cycle, it's 3 to 5 days, super consistent, not a lot of clots, totally chill. Then you can do those things like nourish blood, nourish chi, move blood. You do it through food. Like have some chicken soup at the last day of bleeding, and you'll be fine. We can have some aromatic, have some pesto, do something fun with basil for moving the chi. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I got ahead of myself. So, chicken for right at the end of it. We have chicken soup. Chicken and dang guai is a classic medicinal meal. Um, you usually don't go as extreme as the black chicken white phoenix soup. So you're like, nope, this is assuming somebody's in perfect health. We want to maintain that. Chicken soup with dang guai, a little bit of dang guai added. Also super appropriate to add romania to that. For nourishing the chi, oftentimes we'll look at doing a kanji of some sort, and would be super appropriate to do like a eight treasures kanji, which is bazen tong, and those herbs can be manipulated. It wouldn't be wrong to do a soup with ginseng root in it. And then as we moved into the move chi, you start to look at aromatic foods, spicy foods. Will start to move things and release the egg and moving towards. You've already hit ovulation, so now we're going to look at that egg traveling down the fallopian tubes and so forth. And then moving blood. What are blood moving foods? Peaches, and I can't think of any of my. Is it eggplant? I believe. I don't have that list in front of me. Nope, that's not it. That's the only ones I can think of. You could probably do a dang guai chicken soup again, but increase the dang guai and use the tails of it. That would work. Throwing a little xuan shang, the ligustricum root in there, but a very small amount. A lot of our flowers are blood moving. That doesn't move blood. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. When we start to see imbalances, and in general, what I said about 28 days, if it's 27 days, it's fine. If it's 29 days, it's fine. But the more off the 28-day cycle, the more out of balance you are. If the flow is extremely heavy, we should be concerned, and that's usually comes either from extreme deficiency, like if you're using the biggest, most absorbent pads, and you're bleeding through that every hour, and you're exhausted, you're taking off 2 days of work, and you need a bunch of shepherd's purse or something to stop the bleeding. Hey, great. Oh, super cool. I did not know he did that, and I'm going to have to quiz him more about that since obviously we were just talking about that with the frequent urination for dudes. I will totally quiz him when I see him in class next. Um, so, really heavy flow, and sometimes it comes from deficiency. And so, literally, there's not enough energy to hold the blood in, so it just kind of falls out. Um, as opposed to with somebody who has a lot of heat, where it's literally the pot boiling over. And for like, I don't know who all's on here saying all my regulars know my gibberish, but if you're not familiar with it, when we look at how do we evaluate people, hey, Julie, when we evaluate people from an energetic standpoint, whether we're doing Chinese or Western or Ayurvedic or whatever, there's some general ideas. The idea of comparisons. People are either hot or cold, wet or dry, deficient or excess, or tense and lax. And so we look at variations within that, and most people are more than one of those things. Helps us to understand how to select herbs, what is the overall imbalances of those folks. And so with heavy menses, we see either a extreme deficiency or heat. When we see, I literally, I've had women who have gone like, oh yeah, my menses is fine. I guess it's light or normal. I just use a little Kleenex and that's it. And like, oh my God, no, you're horribly anemic. The So if there's no menses or very light, 1 to 3 days, that is usually a blood deficiency, which oftentimes relates to anemia or yin deficiency. Um, I would encourage blood work in a case like that because uh, there could be a fairly extreme anemia for some reason, or not unexpected if they're very low body fat. So, what is it? If a woman gets below 13% body fat, don't quote me on that, please. Their menses will stop, and until they get a little bit more of that on there, a little bit more normal body fat, their menses will just literally stop. So you see a lot of female athletes frequently will have no menses. And also people who are dealing with eating disorders, anorexia in particular, will oftentimes end up with no menses. Um, we can also find people who are diets low in fat will have hormonal imbalances. Sorry, and Maddie, feel free to throw something out there like specific. I'm going to get to the PCOS here in a second, but I'm like, I don't know. I'm just talking about menstruous stuff because that's kind of the way you looked at it. Um, so, where was I going? Oh, I oftentimes see with people who are eating a vegan diet, and even though they're normal body weight and they're generally eating healthy, if they're not getting enough fat in their diet, and many of our hormones are fat based, fat soluble, fat based hormones, and our cells are made up of a lipid wall, which is lipid meaning fats. And so a deficiency in fat can lead to no menses or hormonal dysregulation. One of my favorite checks, I think I learned this from Will Morris, but I won't swear to that, at an AHG conference. There we go. If you got a bunch of bumps on the back of the arm, that usually means that there's an essential fatty acid deficiency. And deep fried, fish fry and ribs do not count as essential fatty acids. Those are non-essential fatty acids. Checking the person for bumpies on the back of the arm is a quick check to see whether they're getting sufficient essential fatty acids. And that can be fish oils, but for vegans, they can easily do plant oils. I particularly like the Udo's 369 that you can usually get at the health food store. Um, Yeah, it's funny, and Gray, you probably know more about this than I do. I think you had mentioned it once before, um, that there's a whole system of yoga that you do and don't do, the way you exercise, the way you eat, um, Okay, I'll come back to that. Based on where you are in your cycle, and I had a client that came in once, and she was like, "Well, my diet changes, my exercise changes based on where I am in my cycle," and I was like, "That's brilliant." And in that same way that we're nourishing in the front end and invigorating and moving in the second half was kind of the way she looked at her exercise and her diet. And I just thought what she was doing was brilliant. The woman was ridiculously healthy. I literally had to find things to recommend for her, and just tweaking very small things was great. And feel free to, if you got your 2 cents worth on that, Gray, feel free to type it in there. Um, how am I doing? I'm doing good on time. Insulin resistance in PCOS. PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and unfortunately, I won't say common. If you read the stats, but I would say, all right, Jeanette, I'll come back to that one. So with PCOS, I think it's actually underdiagnosed, and there's the classic PCOS where we get a little bit heavier body frame, where even if they're eating and exercising, doing everything right, they're more likely to be heavier, oftentimes overweight. There'll be an increase in body hair and facial hair, and they're at higher risk of blood sugar, diabetes, type 2 diabetes with that. And they're also going to struggle more in, the easiest time to have children is in those late teens, early 20s. People who are dealing with PCOS are less likely to be able to get pregnant then. Not impossible. I literally, a couple of months ago, one of my clients, super nice, super smart, and she was diagnosed with PCOS. The doctor was like, "Well, then you don't have to worry about getting pregnant." And she got pregnant 6 months later, and she was 21. And so it was like, thanks, doc. It's harder to get pregnant, not impossible. Use protection. And she found that out the hard way. The other thing that's a problem is what I just described of that heavier, prone towards diabetes and so forth. There are different subtypes of PCOS. So some people are not that heavy body frame. The menses is usually is frequently debilitating, horribly painful, very heavy and irregular, where it's hard to predict. Chinese medicine has a classic formula that I don't always agree with. Where's your Fuling Tong? Guizhi Fuling Tong, which is cinnamon and poria, poria formula. Sorry, brain cramp. Cinnamon poria formula is frequently used for that, but not everybody matches the pattern that we look for there. So those non-traditional people don't always get that one. The biggest thing is if I suspect somebody has PCOS, I always refer them to a gynecologist because they can do both an ultrasound, but also encouraging them to check their testosterone levels, because testosterone levels are usually elevated, at least high end of normal, if not out of range high for people who have PCOS. And so even if they don't have the cystic ovaries, where there's lots of them there, that in the extreme they burst, and from what I've heard, are horribly painful, that people go to the hospital thinking they've just died, and do all the drugs. From the sounds of it, I would too. That although not life-threatening, not to be ignored. Like, you should go to the hospital and get that checked out, make sure it's not something more serious. But that's not the norm. Sometimes there's very few ovaries that are there, but they're starting to exhibit some of those symptoms. So the elevated testosterone level can be a real tell, and it also speaks to how do we deal with it going forward over time. Frequently, the body will start to adjust in the late 20s, early 30s. The body kind of figures out, like, I don't know, my hormones are messed up, let's compensate. And we can assist that. Because when we have testosterone, there's two forms of testosterone. The free testosterone, which has the all those male sexual characteristics, the bigger bones, heavier body weight, the facial hair and body hair. But then the DHT, the dehydrotestosterone, is the byproduct as our body utilizes it. For men, that shows up as the male pattern baldness and large prostate, but our bodies generally, if we try to take care of ourselves, handles that DHT better. For women, because their body isn't designed to handle that, it tends to show up with a lot of, probably partly to do with the insulin resistance, but also we'll get a lot of hair thinning and baldness in women who are dealing with PCOS. And so one of my go-tos for women with PCOS is saw palmetto. I sometimes I use it long term, sometimes short term. I like the nettle root for them because that's an easier one on the belly, and I would say not safer, but less likely to have digestive upset long term with that. Um, the insulin resistance, the classic approach to it in Western medicine is the second you're diagnosed, regardless of what your blood sugar is, regardless of what your A1C is to put you on metformin, which is kind of the starting for type 2 diabetes. Um, we can obviously dietary change, exercise becomes vital for that. Avoiding sugars and carbohydrates, and I would argue even reducing fruit, especially those higher sugar content fruits. But we can also use the herbs that we would use, like bitter melon, to help regulate the blood sugar early. Also, I like the gumar, the destroyer of sugar. Genema sylvestre is one that is used both to change the taste of sugar and sugar-containing foods, but also helps the pancreas to preserve the islets of Langerhans. You have to say that, the specialized cells in the body that help secrete insulin. So to make sure that we do that, you always have to say that with like a Scottish accent. Um, those are my biggest ones. I find that with PCOS in particular, diet and lifestyle has the greatest impact, and herbs are about chasing the pattern and recognizing that always higher level of testosterone and DHT, the dehydrotestosterone, and getting ahead of that rather than waiting for it to catch up. And you can do a capsule of bitter melon or learn to cook with the Chinese bitter melon fruit is a great way to address that, to like find a way to get that into your diet every day. Would probably be beneficial. Menopause stuff. So it's always funny. I always like to emphasize menopause isn't a disease. It is normal. Just like teenage boys are normal-ish. As we transition, we have phases we go through in life, and menopause is one of those. And so the reality is, it's funny. When I just told the story the other day, when I was in acupuncture school, and we were learning Western stuff and Chinese stuff, and I knew what menopause was, but I'm like, I'm a dude. We can make jokes about menopause all day long, but I have no idea what menopause is all about. And so I do what I oftentimes did when I had medical questions that I didn't feel were being covered well. I asked my mama. And so I didn't remember my mom complaining about menopause the way I was seeing some clients were. And so I was like, so, like, what was menopause like for you? And she had a hysterectomy in her 40, like in her late 30s or 40s. After she had me, they were like, oh, and it was a partial hysterectomy. They tried to put her on hormones then, and she refused, but she had the script. And it's so funny. She joked with me. She was like, well, every once in a while I have a hot flash or a night sweat, and then I'll take one estrogen pill, but then I won't do it again. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not the way you're supposed to use those, but I didn't tell her. But she basically said she was a little hot for about 6 months, but then her body adjusted. And from everything I've read, that's kind of what's supposed to happen. And mom was not perfect, but she was active her whole life, literally up until practically a couple months before she passed away. And she wasn't like running marathons. She was active doing stuff. She liked to go hiking. She liked to go dancing. She wasn't a drinker, so I think the time she had hot flashes a couple times a year were probably she had more than one glass of wine. And she was a healthy body weight her whole life. Um, and I won't say she ate great, but she generally ate well. And for her, I think that allowed her to have a fairly comfortable transition into menopause. And when we look at perimenopause, that time, like this time between your regular predictable menstrual cycle and your body stopping that normal cycle, the menstrual cycle becomes erratic, to say the least. That's when we get what's the Chinese call flooding and trickling. So we'll get like no menses for 4 months. Then, oh my God, I haven't stopped bleeding for a month. Um, and there are definitely herbal approaches and so forth, usually um, looking at food and stress and both the herbs that will help with those, Western or Chinese doesn't matter, as well as how do we do manage that through lifestyle and so forth. Um, when we look at that menopausal, postmenopausal, there's a number of things that we see. We see an increased risk of osteoporosis. We see the skin becomes drier. Vaginal dryness is a problem. Constipation is a problem. And it's funny, sometimes we see weight gain with that. And there's a couple of different ways to look at all of that. The Chinese is convenient. We generically say that that postmenopausal is yin deficiency, and that's a lack of the cooling, nourishing fluids in the body. We can look at it from a more medical perspective. We talk about the decline of estrogen, and the problem is that might be the definition of it, but I would say just as often as I see low estrogen, I see estrogen excess and low progesterone and low testosterone. And sometimes you're like tanked on all three. Um, and so we can look at herbs based on the symptoms to help. Oh my God, that's freaking hilarious. Totally going to steal that. Sorry, yeah, I'm gonna lose it from that one. I've literally never heard that. Um, that looking at diet will have a huge impact. Alcohol is one of the worst things I can think of for menopause. Um, Exercise, I think, becomes vital if that wasn't already a regular part of lifestyle. I think, and there's an argument for both aerobic exercise. But oddly enough, and I'm usually like, oh, it's all about aerobic exercise. Um, there's a good argument for anaerobic exercise, things like weightlifting. Um, Testosterone for men and women declines as we age. And one of the ways to maintain that, because, well, one of the symptoms we see of declining testosterone is the loss of muscle mass. And as we see that decline, body weight goes on. So a lot of times when we see that, 5 or 10 pounds with menopause is normal. But when we go from thin and now we're like, all right, you're getting past just an extra 5 pounds. That's sometimes that reduction in activity that happens for anything from arthritis to whatever. If you don't continue to do some sort of weight work or anaerobic muscle building, muscle maintaining activity, there's likely to be a decline in testosterone. Um, Progesterone, the running joke, it's wild yams. Only the Mexican wild yams. And no, please eat yams; they're very good for you. The reality is the laboratory process that converts Mexican wild yams into progesterone creams is like I could turn this computer into progesterone with this. Um, it is a chemical process rather than some magical thing with wild yams. And so nothing wrong with using that. You can get progesterone creams over the counter that for mild progesterone deficiency can be helpful. In particular, I always think of progesterone. Frequently, we'll see a weight loss. We'll see insomnia that comes with it, and sometimes constipation. And using the progesterone at night will oftentimes make for a way better night's sleep. And estrogen, it's this sounds stupid. Eat your veggies. Um, in general, that can help tremendously. I would argue root vegetables in general. Um, Herb wise, there's a I like the Chinese approaches to it oftentimes. There's a range of different yin nourishing formulas that are appropriate, or for very mild menopause symptoms, we'll use the blood nourishing formulas. Um, but there's a couple of things that can be helpful. There's things like red clover, which is an alternative that I really like for women in the transition as well as postmenopausal. I really like motherwort for some of the depression that comes with menopause sometimes. What other big Western herbs am I a fan of? The Chinese Ramania is excellent. And that's more if there's night sweats, hot flashes, constipation. Ginseng, I think it's important to differentiate. There's different types of ginseng. There's Chinese ginseng, which is considered more warming, and most people who are dealing with menopause don't want to be heated up. Um, the what is it? Siberian ginseng is a bit more dry. Again, not something you want during menopause. The American ginseng is more cooling. All both American and Chinese are both nourishing, but the American ginseng is more cooling. So you'll see a lot of things about that, and generally the direction I want to go with it. And looking at heating foods, we talked about alcohol. Also, venison and lamb are very heating. And certain food sensitivities that may have been very minor in the past will totally throw you under the bus. Um, yes, my question from back there. Yeah, that was something. That's really good stuff. And is that something you're gonna? I did talk about your class on the rituals and practices. The class you've got coming up soon. Is that something you're going to talk about in that class? Because that would be really cool. I'll come for that one. Um, oh yes, and your last thing is the most important. And Chinese or qigong practices, we say the same thing. No standing on your head while you're menstruating. That's really important. Um, and the herb asparagus root, which in Ayurvedic medicine is shatavari, shatavari for some folks, or tian men dong in Chinese herbal medicine. Tian men dong, um, shatavari. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Gray. Um, and so those are excellent for general postmenopausal stuff. It's horribly generic. Um, and I would argue it's not quite the same, but asparagus is probably one of the most nourishing, best herbs out there, or foods out there for just stuff. Um, the the other one, vaginal dryness is one of the biggest complaints I get for postmenopausal, and that can get scary. So it's like one thing just to have vaginal dryness, but in particular low estrogen, and so that can get to the point of like zero. Can get so bad that the vaginal wall gets so thin that it tears, can get bleeding, and literally like goes into the abdominal cavity in bad ways. Hey, Ronnie. Um, and so the Western approach, besides just the estrogen replacement pills, they'll actually use either estrogen creams or they'll actually put an estrogen ring. Probably less scary than the uh, hormone replacement that's oftentimes used systemically. But obviously, that's something that would be bad. There's a couple of approaches I've started making for a particular client a herb infused vaginal insert, but just as a starting point, without getting fancy with herbs, I find that cacao butter is phenomenal. It's both nourishing and also moistening as a that can become a daily practice, and you don't need much. Like that much, just like the end of my pinky is more than enough. Insert it at night, and you might have to wear a pad or just some underwear or something in case something leaks out. Oh, that's too funny. Um, yes, what she just said for yin deficiency, for postmenopausal, reproductive health, jing, all of that. But you said it better. Um, the So a little bit of cacao can be used just as a daily practice to provide health for the vaginal tissues. It can be used as a sexual lubricant as well, with a caution. It is not condom safe because it is a fat, an oil. It can dissolve condoms, so not protective in any way, but as a sexual lubricant, it is safe. And it can be, because cacao butter melts at body temperature, it can be inserted like 30 minutes before sex, rather than saying like, well, stop everything, I'm gonna go get the lube, and that's not hot. And so preferable, I would say, for that standpoint. I've suggested that to a number of my clients, and I hate to say it, I always ask like, how did it work? Do I need to come up with something else? And other than they usually start with too much and it gets messy, it's really worked well. But I've had a couple of people, and boy, I'll tell you what, I don't remember what all I put into it. Um, nope, don't remember what herbs I put in there. But I've used a very similar combination with folks of just infusing those herbs into the cacao butter, and they're inserting it every night, and it's worked it actually, I think the way they said it, it worked 50% better than the estrogen rings that they were putting in. And so, looking at both internal and external herbs for that, because we can also work from the internal environment as well, and it usually does pretty well. Menopause is not the end of life, the end of function. It is a normal progression, and is not a dysfunction. But when we go into it out of balance, it may aggravate some of those imbalances. In particular, if you tended towards anemia, if you tended towards the Chinese concept of hot and dry deficient, that's going to be aggravated. If you have excess heat, that's going to be aggravated. You're going to be an angry menopausal person. So creating balance with that, as with every stage of life, exercise becomes vital. That's super important. I mentioned osteoporosis obviously becomes a greater risk in that time of life. And so even though your greatest influence on bone density happens in your preteen and teen years, even into your 60s, 70s, 80s, you can have an impact on your bone density by doing things like walking. Walking, swimming, tai chi, all have been demonstrated to improve bone density in folks over the age of 60. I am not a fan of the biphosphonates. Those are your bone density medications. And you can usually, between exercise, diet, and some mineral supplementation with can usually get as good as the biphosphonates. There's a lot of people out there starting to question the validity of them as a general rule, in that they're changing the DEXA scan. And the DEXA scan is how you measure bone density, or one way to measure bone density. Um, oh, and everything that Gray just said there, like, yes, I was avoiding going down that path because that's way too much information. So thank you for typing it. Um, that it actually creates an increase in fractures, even though it changes the DEXA scan reading. Also, the osteopenia, which is pre-osteoporosis, I think is the biggest crock I've ever heard in my life, because the bone density that they're looking at is, they give you a score of either +1 or -1. So they're comparing you to a 21-year-old male or female. And I'm like, I don't know about any of y'all, but I am not a 21-year-old male, and no part of me is like that. And so that isn't necessarily a fair comparison. If it's dramatic, then we should be concerned. If you're, walking and breaking bones, if you pick up a cup of coffee and your wrist fractures, then we have to address it, and you may need something stronger. But bone is this living mass that's constantly remodeling, and that happens less well as we age. We also see that the bone matrix, one of its many roles, is to maintain a even balance of the pH of your blood. And so excessive medications, dysregulated blood sugar, things like that can lead to an over-reliance on our bone matrix to try to maintain that. So working on health as a general rule, rather than just an overemphasis on the bone, that's a symptom again, can be helpful. Are mineral-rich teas, and I'm a huge fan of magnesium. Most of us have more than enough calcium. Taking more than 2,600 milligrams of total calcium daily can actually lead to heart problems. Most of us get enough calcium in our foods, and so I usually find that most people are deficient in magnesium. And what I look at for when I recommend magnesium, if there is constipation, insomnia, irritability, elevated blood sugar, elevated blood pressure, magnesium may play a vital role. And so generally there's more than three, but there's three main types of magnesium. Magnesium oxide, which is best for constipation, the least good for everything else, and is what's in most supplements because it's cheap. And so it's not to say that if it has magnesium oxide, it's a crappy product, but it probably is. If they have all three types on there, then it's okay. That's actually a value added. Magnesium citrate is in the magnesium citrate is kind of middle of the road. It does all of them well, to include moving the bowels. So if somebody's got hypertension, high blood pressure, and constipation, it's good. If somebody's diabetic and has constipation, it's good. If they have insomnia, which is really common in menopause, insomnia that is with constipation, then the magnesium citrate. For somebody who's got any of those issues, but their poop is normal or loose, then the glycinate is the better choice. It has the least effect on the bowel, but will benefit those other things. So anytime I see two or more of those symptoms, my first thought is magnesium deficiency. So it's a great way to add into those. Also, because our body's producing less estrogen at that time, we want the estrogen that our body still has in it, as well as the other hormones like testosterone. We want them to be effective and utilized by our body well, and that's making sure that we have the good fats, the essential fatty acids in there. So making sure we're taking fish oils or getting it through dietary fats and so forth. More seeds and nuts, avocados, those are my biggies. Seeds are probably one of the things that as a culture, we don't eat seeds much. Nuts maybe, but not seeds. Seeds are probably some of the healthiest things out there that all of us forget to have. Okay, that was a lot on menopause. Sorry, I don't talk about that one very often because nobody ever asks. All right, what else have I got left? I've got 20 minutes left. I got some junky ones here, unless somebody wants to chime in with another. Oh, you know what I didn't? Look at that. I was talking about all the cool classes at the beginning of this. I forgot to mention the Business of Herbalism class is this coming weekend, October 8th and 9th. I do, although it's for my Chinese students, this one is open to our Western students. Honestly, for any of you who are in the realm of herbalism in any form or fashion and feel like you're lacking in that realm, this is I think, a really good class. All the acupuncturists, interns that I have, I recommend that they take it. Martina was my intern for the last year and a half, and she passed all of her boards in record time, literally, and got licensed. And I was like, "Come meet with me. Let's talk about." And she, oh yeah, pumpkin seeds. Heck yeah. She got to the like, what do I do now? And so looking at how do we decide S corp or LLC, marketing, SS4 to get a EIN number, but then how do we figure out how to promote our products or our services? And it turns out that her class at her school was less than ideal. That they spent more about talking about how to make a website rather than looking at how do we make decisions about everything from a business card to our business name and so forth. And so this class is really a little bit more practical for anybody who's trying to figure it out. If you're successful, been in practice for a couple of years, then don't bother, you don't need it. But for herbalists and acupuncturists, I highly recommend it. And because I don't know who all is still on, but I will say, because the Chinese class starts once a year and is coming up on the 29th, for anybody who's like, I don't know, I'm going to go to acupuncture school in another year or so, I actually recommend the Chinese program. It's a good, prep school for acupuncture school. I find a lot of people, either after the first 3 classes or after they get through a year or 2 of it, then run away to acupuncture school. And they're usually really thankful that that first year is so solidly under their belt, just from the first 3 classes, that they usually excel. I'm super excited. One of my graduates, and was also a practitioner for at least 5 years at the clinic, just ran away to acupuncture school up in Gainesville, and I'm getting all the blow-by-blow from her every couple of days about how the teachers are practically asking her questions, because from an herbal perspective and diagnostically, she knows her crap. Hey, Rachel, the class is this coming weekend, October 8 and 9, and you can do it online, as well as if you're like, well, I can't be there on Sunday. We send you the recording and the PowerPoint for all of that. So I believe it's $300 for the whole weekend, and you can register for that online or call the school phone tomorrow. What's the school phone number? 727-318-2505. And Trish will be there to answer questions if you have any, at 9 tomorrow. She's not in the office. She still evacuated from the hurricane, but she's got the school phone and working some tomorrow. So she'll be able to, if she doesn't pick it up right away, she'll call you back. And I'm going to do, since Gray's here, October 13th, the Ayurvedic class on daily and seasonal rituals of Ayurvedic medicine is coming up. And I think that's 35. I could be wrong. I don't know. But definitely register ahead of time, because she always has yummy snacks and cool supplies to do stuff. And so we got to know how many people are coming. The October 6th is our anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, the muscular system. Tomorrow, if you're local, Herb Walk 9 a.m. here at the school, 6340 Central Avenue. October 7th is open house again here at the school. 5:30 to 7 if people have questions and want to see what the weird stuff that we do here. Even more important, October 14th. Oh, and I didn't rant about this. I knew there was something else. I'm doing a free herb-drug interaction class. This was not originally on the schedule. We just added this a couple of weeks ago because our industry is under attack. Yay! And basically, I try usually twice a year. I do an herb-drug interaction class, super appropriate for beginners as well as practitioners. I try to keep it really practical. I'm not going to sit there and talk about the P450, yada, yada, yada. Even pharmacists struggle with that kind of stuff. But we've recently, some of you may have noticed, I think I ranted about it last month maybe, that there was some guy, I believe it was in England, was taking like 160,000 IUs of vitamin D. And somebody that I didn't teach, obviously, somebody he was seeing, he was seeing for health advice recommended this absurd amount of vitamin D. The max I usually recommend is 10 or 15,000 in extreme cases when 5,000 didn't meet it, didn't raise it. MDs will sometimes do a maximum of 100,000 IUs once a week or once a month, and that's in extreme cases. And this person was doing 160,000 IUs daily, plus a bunch of other supplements. Ended up in the hospital. Stopped taking all of that stuff, recovered, and was fine. But this was in headlines. It was written up in the British Journal of Medicine, the JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, a few others. And it was like, oh, crazy people. And then we had more recently that a coroner made this announcement that a congressman's wife had passed away, and this was out in California, because she had ingested white mulberry leaf. And white mulberry leaf is Sungye. And because he found a fragment of a leaf in her stomach, therefore it had some mild diuretic properties. It must be what killed her, even though she was struggling with diabetes and overweight and some other health issues they didn't list. And I'm quite sure was on a range of medications. And yet, therefore, it was this fragment of a leaf. There were so many things wrong with that. Yes, Kristen, kind of. Like up north in particular, you're likely to have less, but you should maintain healthy vitamin D levels throughout the year. So that was just some of the worst yellow journalism. And then when people who were smarter than him started to question him about the validity of his statements, he was like, well, I can't comment on these things. And I'm like, wait, you contacted the news media to say this about somebody, but when asked questions about it, all of a sudden then it's unethical for him to answer questions. And I scream foul, yes. And not even a week after that, I found or showed up in my Facebook feed, I think, an article from a cardiologist that was saying our young people are ending up with heart disease and tachycardia and arrhythmias from herbal supplements. And it was, my students have all been tortured by this recently. And it was some of the most absurd yellow journalism. And she was like, 20-somethings are showing up with arrhythmias. And basically, all she could come up with was ma huang, which honestly would be illegal if they were doing that. I'm going to guess it was probably from Monster and all the other little crazy stimulant drinks. She had no basis for any of it, but it sounded like her office was filled with 20-somethings, because a lot of 20-somethings go to cardiologist, or it was all in the ER. And without a doubt, people who are doing like multiple cans of stimulant drinks like Monster and so forth are ending up in the ER, no doubt. but that has more to do with caffeine, which is not an herb. That is an alkaloid that is a scheduled drug. Um, and a variety of other things like amino acids, again, isolated, not herbs, and occasionally things like guarana are put in there, which in high amounts with all this other crap definitely could cause things. She quoted something else that she was like, and research shows that these herbs are dangerous. And so I found the research that she was referencing. And this is one of the problems is nobody clicks on the links when they say that. I'm like, oh no, I want to read that research. Like maybe I'm in a dangerous business and I don't know it, even though this doesn't happen. And the research was a look at reported adverse events from herbs, not specifically cardiology issues, but all adverse events from 1966 to like 2016. And there was about a dozen instances. Most of them were the adulterations and illegal. One case with that they in a 70-year-old woman who took ashwagandha, generally something very safe, um, and she ended up with an arrhythmia. And in class, we were like discussing why could that be. And if you don't know it, ashwagandha is a nightshade, in which some people would call as a rash, irritability, and potentially an arrhythmia. And so it probably was diagnostically valid that she probably did have an adverse reaction to it, although uncommon. But it indicated that she has a nightshade sensitivity and probably should eliminate other nightshades like potatoes, tomatoes, all peppers, eggplant. Those are the biggies. I think I'm forgetting one. Oh, and tobacco. All of those are nightshades that can cause problems for folks, to include that arrhythmia. But of course, that was lost on, I'm sure, the doctors in this case. And most of the references were to supplements. And so nutraceuticals, which are chemicals or extracts of herbs, are very different from herbs themselves, and we get lumped into all of that. And although I love me a good nutraceutical, the reality is those are very different and do have a little bit higher risk factors. So I always use the example that coca plants are totally safe with thousands of years of history. Cocaine, crack, might have a few issues. That's an alkaloid that's chemically extracted from this plant and concentrated and causes some issues. The same is true. Poppy plants have been used for everything from chronic diarrhea to spasmodic cough to pain for centuries. You pull out that alkaloid heroin out of there, you might be having a problem. Uh, Oh, you didn't know that? Oh, yeah, they're the same plant. So the reality is, this is the yellow journalism that comes and attacks our plants about every 5 or 6 years. This is like something that's almost anticipated. And even things like Consumer Reports that are generally fairly unbiased have a thing against us. And so as a profession, we need to educate ourselves and call them on it. And so I get a little fired up, and Tricia said, Bob, you need to teach a class. And so we scheduled the herb drug interaction class a couple of weeks ago to combat the misinformation, and as well as every herbalist should be aware of ways to avoid having any kind of adverse reaction. Because as a community, the better we all do, the more we educate ourselves, the more we look for that potential herb drug interaction classes. The better we look, the more effective we're going to be, and the less opportunity for them to be able to point at these single absurd instances where something bad happens. So I will be doing good information for that class, but also jumping up and down on my soapbox and ranting and raving and frothing at the mouth. So, oh, nice. Yeah, no, I've been plugging the heck out of that one, Gray. I think that's going to be a really good class. And I'm going to wrap it up. And I didn't mention the food as energy that Martina is teaching on October 19th. I don't. That might be a free one. I'm not positive. Check online. We should have that on the website, traditionsherbschool.com. And if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde from Tradition School of Herbal Studies in beautiful sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, except for when we're being attacked by Hurricane Ian. And acupuncture and herbal therapies. We have both 6 days a week clinical practice where you can see one of our fine practitioners, acupuncture physicians, and herbalists, as well as 3 nights a week. We've got our intern practice. You can also come in and just get any herbs that you'd like. We have probably one of the largest herbal apothecaries with everything Western, Chinese, some African. We are hopefully next week we can focus in on our bioregional stuff. So all the plants that you can't get anywhere else, we are growing and sourcing and going to put in the apothecary as a dried cut and sift herb. And we've got the plant nursery in the back of the clinic that's at 2520 Central Avenue. And we do this every month. I didn't do my usual speech at the front, but the last Friday of every month we will do this. I know I babbled and most of you forgot half of what I said, so I will upload this on our YouTube page where you can listen to this and the last 2 years of my crazy open forums, as well as lots of other good stuff. One of these days I'm going to get back on it and do some shorts, and that's the Tradition School of Herbal Studies YouTube page. You can listen to this then. Until I see you all next time. Good night, all. Thank you for joining and giving up your Friday evening. Have a lovely weekend. Hopefully I have my power back now. Yes. Good night. Oh, and send in your questions so that I can do whatever cool questions you got for next time. And good night. And video. Yay. Oops. That didn't work. Try that again. There we go.